Hi, my name is Al Pittampalli, and you're watching Behind the Brand.
Hi, I'm Brian Elliott. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Brand. Today I'm here with best-selling author of the book Persuadable, Al Pittampalli. Al, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Al, usually ask my guests, how'd you get this job?
The answer is writing. I started writing on the web about 10 years ago, just blog posts. I kind of started writing for myself and writing for some of the companies I was consulting with, and my ideas started to take shape and get refined, and they started to spread, and more people wanted me to write for them, and I wrote books, and that brings me to the new book I have, which is called Persuadable.
So it's really a book about leadership, right?
Yeah, it's very much a book about leadership. I mean, actually both my books are about leadership. My first book was called Read This Before Our Next Meeting, and it was called a manifesto. It was basically a manifesto for decisive leadership, right? Every big organization, even some small startups, have this problem. There's tons of meetings every single day, and they're all terrible, right? And they're often discussing trivial issue. And my prescription was, let's stop meeting about all these things. Let's just make a decision and move forward. But this new book is kind of the opposite, because even though that works for small issues and small decisions and topics, when it comes to the big things where we really need to get things right, we need to be persuadable, we need to be open-minded, we need to be willing to change our mind.
I want to ask the question maybe from the other side of the coin, which is what gives you the right and experience to write about something like this? Have you been a leader? Do you know this firsthand? Like, how did you get all these insights?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a student of leadership for a long time, both kind of case studies, so I've actually really looked at the profiles of leaders.
So what you're saying is you've been, studying it, but you've been a victim of leadership maybe too, right? Like,
yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think that's kind of, I think Tony Robbins has a great quote, which he says, whenever you do something in your life, it's usually something profound. It's usually because of inspiration or desperation. And for me, it was desperation because, when I was working in the corporate world, I had these leaders that I didn't really think were managing me in the right way, didn't think were actually kind of steering the boat the way I thought they needed to. So I started to really look into leadership, not just, like I said, the biographies and the profiles, but really the academics. Like, what do we know about the science of leadership and what kind of works and what doesn't?
So let's break that down a little bit, unpack it. So what do you think most people are getting wrong, these people in leadership positions?
I think what people get wrong is this idea of confidence, right? In our traditional leadership archetype, I call it, our culture is just always in this pursuit of confidence. Everybody wants to be more confident, and they want to be more certain about their ideas. They want to show up to the meeting with that confident posture and say, this is the right way to go. And even though that looks good, that is not the path to leadership success, because in a world that is changing faster than ever, a world that is uncertain and unpredictable, it's actually keeping our confidence in check and intellectual humility and realizing that we can't know all the answers. That's kind of the foundation for good decision making.
Is that because the confidence is misinterpreted as arrogance?
I think it's because we naively assume that confidence equals competence, right? I mean, our brain is hardwired whenever we see somebody who is confident, right? Whether it be somebody in a job interview or whether it's some pundit on CNN that just basically says that they know that Donald Trump is never going to get elected president of the United States. If they say it confidently, we just assume that they're correct. And everything we know about statistics shows us that that's just not always true. In fact, a lot of times the most confident people are the ones that are the least accurate. And so that's one of the reasons why we kind of often are more confident than we need to be or than we should be.
It's interesting. I sat down with Susan Cain, who wrote that book about introverts.
Yes.
Love Susan's work, and it's actually super insightful for me. And there's statistics that say that introverts make better leaders. Mm-hmm. And it's because they're maybe better listeners or more empathetic. Whereas, maybe the exception to that rule is like Gary Vaynerchuk, who's like a very outgoing, outspoken leader, right. Who at the same time is outspoken and super aggressive maybe, but he also cares about humans.
Right, and there are a lot of benefits to kind of confidence and even overconfidence, right? I mean, one is that people assume that you're a better leader, and so there's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy. And also, this kind of optimism that comes with confidence can kind of push you through barriers, right? Like, it's kind of like the stubborn entrepreneur who doesn't want to kind of think about the fact that his product will fail or doesn't want to listen to feedback and just continues to push and push and push, and eventually, even though he probably shouldn't have, he did succeed. And so there are all those cases of those. But what you have to realize is that for every one of those entrepreneurs that makes it, there's 100 others that didn't. And so it's this right balance of knowing when to be confident and when not to. In fact, I say, instead of thinking about being confident, you should be calibrated, which means that when you have good reason to be confident, when there's evidence, when there's good reasons to support your belief, your idea, your product, yeah, be confident. But when there's not evidence, when everybody around you is telling you that this is a bad idea, good, smart people are telling you that, you may want to consider to lower your confidence and realize that maybe this isn't the best idea.
So what else are leaders getting wrong?
One of the things that leaders are getting wrong is that they are terrified of flip-flopping. I mean, this is obviously very kind of salient because of the political climate we're in right now in the States. This idea of kind of contradicting yourself, kind of being inconsistent, saying one thing and then a little bit later saying another. And the reality is, in a world that is changing fast, you should be consistent, right? Intelligent people update their beliefs with new evidence. And yet we are hardwired to fear inconsistency, right? We just don't want to look inconsistent. Any CEO who is in the public needs to be careful of what is called the consistency effect, the consistency principle, which is that when we make a commitment, we have a pull to act consistent with those commitments. So the classic example is a CEO or entrepreneur that writes this book, right? They've achieved success and they write these books and they say, these are the principles, these ideas that made me successful. And then you realize that those principles don't work anymore, right? Because what got you here won't necessarily get you there. And what they don't realize is they are wedded in some way to what they wrote in that book, and they might be reticent to change their mind because we don't want to look inconsistent. Because what if somebody presents me the book and shows, hey, you're a hypocrite, right? You said do this, but now you're doing this. Yeah. It makes sense that we're going to need to be inconsistent and change our mind as new devices come to the table, new technologies, new disciplines, new methodologies. And that's going to look a little bit weird from a leadership perspective, right? Because if you come into the boardroom and you say 1 month that we're doing it this way, and then the next month we're doing it another way, people are going to look at that as flip-flopping. But if the world really did change in that month, who the heck cares, right? That's what needs to happen for you to succeed.
So talk about some of the principles that make a good leader.
One of them is active open-mindedness. So that's different from open-mindedness, because everybody thinks that everyone will at least concede that leaders need to be open-minded. But what open-mindedness is kind of being receptive to negative information, to feedback and that kind of thing. But in my study of successful leaders, what I'm finding is that the truly successful leaders aren't just open to that information, they seek it out, right? When's the last time, for all the leaders and entrepreneurs that are watching, that you asked your employees for feedback?
Yeah, how am I doing?
Right, ask them, not just waited and say, hey, I have this open door policy, anytime you want to give me feedback, go ahead and do it. I'm talking about persistently ask and ask and ask, because the first five times, I guarantee you they won't tell you, because nobody wants to give you bad feedback, whether it's your employee or your spouse or your kids. But if you really want it enough, because that's what great leaders do, they realize they need feedback to improve, then you will consistently show up to the table, actively seek it out, and you'll find information that will make you grow as a leader.
I was going to ask, what do the good leaders do with it after that? Like, do they actually implement it, or they're like, yeah, good to know, thanks for telling me, and then,
Well, that's exactly right. The reality is that feedback just gotten, a lot of leaders think that just getting the feedback is a gift to the employee, like just listening is a gift. Right?
Be like, oh, you don't understand me. Like, I know the vision for this company.
Exactly. Yeah. And the act of getting the feedback is just kind of like the example I always give is like town halls, where you have this politician or this business person who's standing up on a stage and all the little people are sitting in the audience, and somebody asks a question and they sit down and the CEO just kind of goes on a diatribe or a monologue for an hour, and they feel like they've done their job because they've given the people a voice.
They did ask, yeah.
Exactly, but the reality is, the reason you ask for feedback is not just to give that person a voice. The reason you ask for feedback is to improve yourself, right? If you are a high-performance athlete or high-performance leader or anybody who follows the principles of deliberate practice, you know that in order to improve, you have to understand your own weaknesses. And it turns out we're actually pretty bad at identifying our own weaknesses. We need other people to help us out. And so when we seek out feedback from other people, we shouldn't just do it to listen and to get them to flap their gums. We should do it because we want to know what our weaknesses are so we can improve.
Well, I would guess that too. Part of the problem is that we're listening so that we can respond. It's like that classic, argument style or discussion style where it's like, I'm not really listening. I hear what you're saying, but I'm only waiting to then fire back. It's like, oh, that's what you think of me, but no, actually, this is what I think of you, or this is, almost to justify my position. This is why I do what I do. This is why I just steamrolled you, or this is why I'm letting you go, or I don't care about your feelings, or.
That's exactly right. And, a lot of times these feedback conversations turn into arguments where the person getting the feedback will defend themselves. And I actually think that there's some virtue to the kind of this mutual feedback conversation, right? Like you give me feedback and then I don't just fully accept that feedback, right? I ask questions and I clarify and I say, well, wait a minute, I don't know if that necessarily makes sense or not. But the posture is you're clarifying and you're trying to get to the truth. Because what being persuadable is all about is really letting the best idea prevail. It's not letting my idea prevail or your idea. It's a commitment to letting the best idea prevail. The idea that makes the most sense, the idea that's the most valuable, the feedback that actually is true.
Well, that's important actually for these different personality types, whether you're introvert, extrovert, or ambivert, right? Like sometimes the extrovert, I think of Gary. Gary's the classic extrovert. I mean, sometimes they will steamroll right over the introvert who may have the better idea but doesn't speak up because of whatever reason, right? So, and Susan points out in her book that sometimes the person with the loudest voice gets the credit or gets to move their idea forward only because they speak the loudest.
Exactly.
Not necessarily because it's the best.
Exactly. And Adam Galinsky, who's at Columbia Business School, along with other researchers, found this really interesting insight in their studies, which is that powerful people actually assume that other people share their opinion, right? And not only do they do that, but they also have an inability to take perspectives, right? So when you're feeling powerful, when you're a powerful person in your organization or your startup, or even if you're just feeling powerful in the moment, you have the loudest voice and you also have a diminished capacity to listen to other people. You need to recognize that and you need to actually take extra effort to slow yourself down and say, hey, I know I'm biased right now. I know I'm feeling powerful. What is this person really trying to tell me? What is the truth? And if you ask that question, you have a real competitive advantage.
So you wrote your first book under the tutelage of Seth Godin, this Domino project, and you told me off camera that he was really critical and in a very constructive way. Talk to me about some of the things that you're bad at that maybe you struggled with or that he helped challenge you to do better.
Well, one of the things that Seth taught me was this kind of what we were talking about before, which is the value of perspective taking, right? When you're not good at something or when you're a novice, you're kind of in your own head, right? When you're an interviewer, when you're a salesperson, you're trying to think about all the things that you need to do right, and you forget that there's another person over there. And if you can just free up some cognitive space and ask yourself, what is that person thinking right now? What is the experience of that person? That changes the game, right? I mean, I think that's why Seth is who he is. I think he's better at perspective taking than anyone with his readers, with his customers. And he taught me to really slow down and understand who exactly you're talking to and what are their motivations, fears, and desires. Because that's the only way you're going to influence them. That's the only way you're going to learn from them.
That sounds familiar to like what Stephen Covey used to write about, seek to understand before we're understood, or that whole idea of empathy. And okay, that's solid advice. A lot of people watch this show, they're entrepreneurs, they have small businesses, or they're in some sort of struggle mode, where they're trying to make things happen. What's your opinion about, entrepreneurship? Do you think it's something that we're born with? Are we born leaders, or is it something that we can learn? Are these skills that can be taught?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that some people are probably predisposed to the kind of entrepreneurship gene, but I don't think they're born. I think they are developed, and I think it's just a really specific skill set that you can adopt. I mean, it's probably the biggest is just this comfort or being able to deal with uncertainty. right? I mean, entrepreneurship, by definition, is you're trying to do things in the face of uncertainty, in conditions where you don't know if your product is going to sell or this particular strategy or proposal or tactic is going to work. And if you do that often, if you try things and you fail, then you start to develop a kind of familiarity with it. You're like, you know what? This wasn't great, this failure, but it wasn't that bad. And the more you can do it over and over again, the more you can develop that kind of gene. And the same thing for leaders as well. Like, leaders really need to try out different ways of leading and experiment and determine what works and what doesn't, because that will help them become better leaders.
So do you think this is what gets people stuck, is that they get stuck in either the fear factor, like, okay, I'm really not being given a second chance, or at least I don't feel like I have a second chance, or I don't have any wiggle room to flip-flop or feel like the perception of flip-flopping, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's several reasons why this is very hard for people. One of them is simply because of the way our brains are designed. We are cognitive misers, which means that our brains are determined to conserve energy. If we know one way of doing things, that's what we're comfortable with, and we don't want to change, right? Yeah. If you're walking to your to your office every single day with one path, why would you choose another? And the answer is because that other way is better, or it might be better. Yeah. And so overcoming that kind of cognitive and biological limitation is crucial for anybody who wants to be a leader, entrepreneur, or just a high performance professional.
You're right. I mean, we have sayings like, if it's not broke, don't change it, right? Or is that the right? Did I say that right? if it's not broke, don't fix it. I don't know what the phrase is, but or we've always done it this way. We've done it this way forever, as if to like it's a appeal to legacy or appeal to tradition, right? Which is a fallacy of logic.
Right. But the key here is, and this is something I point out with my book, is that sometimes that's a good thing. In fact, we want to go with the things that work, because why wouldn't we? But the argument that I make is that there's a difference between the small things and the big things. In the small things, be decisive, right? Just pick a way to do it, try it out, and just go for it. Because why waste your time on the stuff that probably just needs to be good enough? When it comes to the bigger issues, right? Hiring people, making a decision on what product to fund, these are issues where you should be persuadable. You should be open to new paths, new opportunities, new ways of thinking. You might want to consult a lot of people. You might want to call a meeting. These are the things that we need to do when the stakes are high.
Can we talk about grudges for a second?
Sure.
I've known a few leaders that hold grudges. What advice can you give? And I guess I use the word grudge, like basically holding on to past experiences, or remembering things and using it against others in the future. Like, you didn't support me when I was nothing, and now I'm something, and now I'm seeking retribution or something like that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that grudges are kind of wasted energy. If you have a grudge with somebody, it might be useful information. I talk about this idea of the feeling of knowing, which is a term that Dr. Robert Burton came up with, which is that feeling that we get that we just know something to be true, right? This is this thing with anger. This is the thing with love. It's like, it's not some kind of rational experience. It's just this feeling. So when you have a grudge with somebody, there's this feeling of knowing. There's this feeling like, I really don't like this person. And you kind of have a vague understanding of why that is, because they probably have some experiences in the past. But you're probably not tapped into what it really is. Like, what is it about that is so terrible to you, right? Like, is it striking a nerve? Is it striking a belief that you have about yourself that you actually deep down think it's true, and now it's an insecurity, and now this person has reaffirmed that?
Yeah, I guess that's a possibility. I guess what I was thinking is, a lot of these leaders, right, who are now in positions of leadership or in position of power, they had to sort of bide their time, right? Pay their dues, or whatever phrase that goes along with that.
Right.
They had to really take a beating to get to where they are. They had to survive, like cockroaches sometimes.
Right.
They were the strongest, not necessarily the most talented, but like last man standing. And so I can imagine, at least I've known some of these leaders who are very guarded and who are very paranoid about, being backstabbed or taken down off their throne, and so they're just always so concerned about protecting their little piece of real estate, right? That they can't be good leaders.
Right. I don't think leaders are very different than scientists, or at least I don't think they should be. And you see in the scientist world, there's some of the greatest scientists that I've studied were basically falsified their entire life's work, right? Like they came up with a finding after I've already achieved fame for some kind of discovery that they made that kind of invalidated what they already did. Now they had a decision to make. Do I commit fraud and do I hide this? Or do I just realize that that's what science is about? It's about discovering the truth. It's about letting the best idea prevail. And my heroes are the ones that chose the kind of the right path. In leadership, why is it any different, right? If somebody has a better idea than you, if somebody is a better leader than you, then it's a matter of integrity. It's a matter of knowing what your mission in life is with the organization's mission to step aside and say, you know what, that is a better idea. That is a better project. You are better suited for this particular responsibility. It's a radical way to think about business, but I think it's about time for that kind of radical thinking. It's so funny because in movies and in our culture, we always admire and kind of hold up the people who resist persuasion, right? Think about every movie hero you can think of, whether it's Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games, who's resisting the attempts from the Capitol to kind of persuade her, or all the Jedis in Star Wars that are resisting the dark side. And we get the idea that resisting persuasion is kind of a heroic leadership trait. And sometimes it is, but a lot of times accepting persuasion, quitting, giving up on an idea, discarding a belief is just as heroic because it's the right thing for an organization, it's often the right thing for the individual, and it's often the right thing for society.